Story 1. I spent one night in a remote cabin and regretted it forever. You know how people say, "I'll never forget that night"? Most of them are lying. Most nights blur together. A smear of cheap wine, Netflix, and the gentle hum of forgetfulness. But not this one. This one is burned into me. It's not a memory. It's a splinter under my skin that I can feel every single time my heart beats. Let me back up. I just turned 29. That horrible age where you're not young enough to be stupid without consequences, but not old enough to have any real wisdom. My girlfriend, Lena, had left me 3 months earlier for a guy who sold artisanal pickles. I'm serious. Pickles. I was a mess. My friends, trying to be kind, pooled together and rented me a remote cabin for a long weekend. "Get your head straight," they said. "No cell service, no distractions. Just you and the trees." The cabin was in the Adirondacks, 6 miles down a dirt road that felt more like a suggestion than a path. The kind of place where the nearest neighbor is a 10-minute drive, and the nearest town is an hour after that. I arrived around 4 in the afternoon, the autumn sun already low and orange, throwing long shadows that made the pine trees look like prison bars. The cabin itself was charming, in a rustic way. Hand-hewn logs, a stone fireplace, a porch with a rocking chair that creaked exactly the way you'd want a rocking chair to creak. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old dust. There was a kerosene lamp, a wood-burning stove, and a single bed with a quilt that looked like my grandmother might have made it. On the table, the owner had left a note. "Enjoy your stay. Lock the door at night. The forest gets loud." I laughed at that. The forest gets loud. What a folksy thing to say. I spent the evening chopping kindling, lighting a fire, and heating up a can of chili on the stove. No electricity, which I'd known going in. That was the point, right? To unplug. I ate by candlelight, reading a dog-eared paperback copy of The Shining, which in retrospect was a hilarious lack of self-awareness. By 9 o'clock, I was yawning. The silence out here wasn't really a silence. It was a presence, a low, humming pressure behind my ears. Every few minutes, an owl would call out, or a branch would snap somewhere in the dark, and I'd feel my shoulders tighten before I forced them down again. I locked the door, deadbolt, chain. The windows had those old-fashioned wooden shutters, so I closed them too. I told myself I wasn't scared. I was just being prudent. I fell asleep around 10. What woke me up was the cold. Not a gradual chill. A sudden, violent cold, like someone had opened a door to January. My eyes snapped open. The fire had died down to coals, casting the room in a dim, breathing orange glow. My breath fogged in the air. I pulled the quilt up to my chin and listened. Nothing, just the wind. But then a sound. Outside the cabin. Not an animal. I've heard raccoons. I've heard deer. This was something else. A soft, deliberate thump, like a boot stepping onto the porch. I told myself it was the wood settling. Old cabins do that. They groan, they shift, they play tricks on you. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Thump. Another step. Closer this time. Right by the door. My heart started doing this thing where it beat too fast and then seemed to forget what it was supposed to do next. I sat up slowly, trying to make no noise. The quilt fell away, and the cold bit into my skin like tiny teeth. I looked at the door. The deadbolt was still thrown. The chain was still on. Thump. That was the third step, right on the threshold. And then knocking. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just polite. The kind of knock a neighbor would give if they wanted to borrow a cup of sugar at a reasonable hour. Except it was 3 in the morning, and I was 6 miles from the nearest road. I didn't move, couldn't. My body had turned to stone. The knocking came again. 3 more knocks. A pause. Then a voice. Not a human voice. Not exactly. It sounded like a human voice trying to imitate a human voice, like someone had only ever heard speech described in a book. It was flat. Too flat. No warmth. No breath. No inflection. Let me in. 2 words. That's all. But they crawled under my skin like centipedes. I opened my mouth to say something. Who's there? Go away, but no sound came out. My throat had closed up. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the stove. It was cold and heavy in my hand. The doorknob turned. Not violently, gently, like someone testing to see if you'd forgotten to lock it. The deadbolt held, but I heard the chain rattle. A soft, metallic whisper. Let me in. Same flat voice. Same 2 words. I looked around the room for another exit. There was a back door, but it led to the woods. And whatever was outside was already between me and the front. I weighed my options. Stay here with the thing at the door, or run into the dark forest where I'd trip over roots and break an ankle. Neither option felt great. Then the knocking stopped. The voice stopped. The cold seemed to retreat a few inches. I waited, holding my breath, counting the seconds. 30, 60, 90, nothing. I crept to the window and pulled the shutter open just a crack. The porch was empty. The moon was out, half full, casting pale light on the pine needles. No footprints in the frost. No figure lurking. Just the rocking chair moving slightly back and forth, even though there was no wind. I told myself I must have dreamed it. Must have been a nightmare. That happens, right? Stress, isolation, a bad paperback. I sat on the edge of the bed for the rest of the night, poker in hand, watching the door until the first gray light of dawn bled through the cracks. At sunrise, I packed my bag. Didn't even make coffee. I just walked out the door, got in my car, and drove. I told myself I'd never go back. But here's the thing about regret. It doesn't start when the bad thing happens. It starts when you realize you can't unhear what you've heard. For weeks afterward, I'd be in my apartment, safe in bed with the lights on, and I'd hear that flat voice in my head. Let me in. And I'd get up and check the locks. Every single night. Still do. But that's not the worst part. The worst part came later, when I told my story to a local ranger. He went quiet, then said, "That cabin's been empty for years. Nobody's rented it out since the 80s. I laughed. That's impossible. My friends booked it through a site. There was a key under the mat. He shook his head. Son, I'm telling you, that cabin doesn't belong to anyone. It's condemned. Been condemned since a family disappeared from it in 1982. Left all their things behind. Dinner still on the table. I didn't believe him. I drove back there the next weekend to prove him wrong. The dirt road was the same. The turnoff was the same. But where the cabin should have been, there was nothing but a field of weeds and a single stone chimney, half collapsed. No porch, no door, no rocking chair. I spent one night in a remote cabin that didn't exist, and I regretted it forever, because sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still feel that cold, that presence, and I hear the knock. 3 slow knocks, polite, patient, waiting. Story 2. The isolated cabin in the woods had a visitor at 3 a.m. I should have listened to the first story, but you know how we are. We think we're different, smarter, braver. We think horror happens to other people, the ones who make bad choices in movies, the ones who go down into the basement when they hear a weird noise. My name is Sam, and I made that exact choice. A year after my friend Mark's experience, the one he still couldn't talk about without his hands shaking, I found myself standing in front of the same dirt road. Mark had begged me not to go. It's not a cabin, Sam. It's a trap. Something uses it. Something wears it like a skin. I told him he was traumatized, that the mind plays tricks in isolation, that I was going to document the location, take photos, prove it was just an abandoned foundation. I was a journalist, after all, a skeptic. I had a camera, a voice recorder, and a healthy disrespect for ghost stories. The drive-in was muddy. My rental car bottomed out twice. The forest seemed denser than Mark had described. The pines were so thick they blocked the sky, and the air smelled not like cedar but like wet stone and something else. Something rotting. I told myself it was just leaf litter. And then I saw it. The cabin. Intact. Exactly as Mark had described it, the log walls, the porch, the rocking chair. But something was wrong. It was too clean. No moss, no peeling paint, no boarded windows. It looked like it had been built yesterday and then abandoned for an hour. That kind of wrongness that makes your stomach drop because you can't articulate why. I parked the car and got out. The afternoon sun was already slanting through the trees, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment I stepped onto the porch. I tried the door. Unlocked. Inside it was the same. Cedar and dust. A fireplace. A single bed with a quilt. And on the table a fresh note. My blood went cold. I picked it up. In neat, looping handwriting. Enjoy your stay. Lock the door at night. The forest gets loud. Mark hadn't mentioned a note. I took a photo. Then I searched the cabin. No electricity, no plumbing, no sign of anyone having been here recently. But the wood stove had cold ash, and the bed looked slept in. The quilt was rumpled. The pillow still had a dent. I set up my equipment. Camera on a tripod aimed at the door. Voice recorder running on the nightstand. I told myself I was being thorough. I told myself I wasn't scared. I built a fire, ate a cold sandwich, waited. Dark came fast. Without city lights, the night just falls like a curtain. By 8, I couldn't see my hand in front of my face except for the fire's glow. I kept the fire high, fed it every hour, watched the door. Nothing happened. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight. I started to feel silly. Maybe Mark had been right about the cabin, but wrong about the haunting. Maybe I'd just spend a boring night and go home with some atmospheric photos. I fell asleep in the chair around one. The cold woke me, not a gradual chill, a violent, bone-deep cold that yanked me out of sleep like a hook. My eyes flew open. The fire was dead. Not dying, dead. The coals were black and cold, as if they'd never been lit. My breath fogged. I looked at my watch. 3 a.m. Exactly. And then I heard it. Not footsteps on the porch. Not knocking. A different sound. A dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled through the dirt. Slow. Rhythmic. Getting closer. I looked at the door. The deadbolt was still thrown. The chain was on. But the dragging sound didn't stop at the door. It circled the cabin. I could hear it moving from the front to the side, then to the back, then around to the other side. Circling, like a shark. And then, a tap on the window. I turned my head so slowly I felt my vertebrae click. The window was dark, just a black rectangle. But something was pressed against the glass. Something pale. Not a face. Not exactly. It was more like a suggestion of a face, two darker patches where eyes might be, a smear where a mouth might open. It had no features, but I could feel it looking at me. The tap came again. Tick, 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 like fingernails. I grabbed my camera more out of instinct than sense. I raised it, and the flash went off bright, searing white. For a split second, I saw what was outside. Don't ask me to describe it. I can't. Every time I try, the memory slips. But I can tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't a man. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, too tall for its limbs. Its skin was the color of old milk. And its smile, God help me, it had a smile that went up past its ears, full of teeth that didn't belong in any mouth I've ever seen. The flash died. The thing was gone. I sat in the dark for the rest of the night, holding the camera like a weapon, listening to the dragging sound slowly fade into the trees. At dawn, I ran to the car and drove until I hit a town with cell service. I looked at the photos on my camera. The ones from inside the cabin were fine. The one with the flash, the one I'd taken of the window, showed nothing but my own reflection. Pale, wide-eyed, terrified. And behind me, just over my shoulder, a shape. Blurry, indistinct, but definitely there. The isolated cabin in the woods had a visitor at 3 a.m. And I brought its picture home with me. That was 6 months ago. I still have nightmares. I still wake up at 3 o'clock on the dot, gasping, my room freezing cold. And sometimes when I look in the mirror too long, I see that shape behind me again, closer than before. Story 3. We thought the cabin was empty until we heard footsteps outside. You'd think 2 stories would be enough. You'd think after Mark and Sam, everyone would stay the hell away from that patch of woods. But humans are herd animals and herds are stupid. We went out there because we didn't believe either of them. My name is Jess. Mark is my older brother. Sam is my fiance's best friend. When they both came back with the same story, the same wrong story, I figured they'd fed each other's delusions. Mass hysteria. Group reinforcement. I'd read about it in my psych classes. So when my fiancé, Daniel, suggested we spend a weekend at the infamous cabin as a kind of lark, a paranormal investigation with a few friends, I agreed. It would be fun. We'd debunk it. We'd post the video online and get 1 million views. Easy. The group was me, Daniel, our friend Chloe, who claimed to be sensitive to energies, and Chloe's boyfriend, Marcus, who claimed nothing but was mostly there for the beer. We drove up in Daniel's SUV on a Friday afternoon, loaded with camping gear, flashlights, a digital recorder, and a lot of bravado. The dirt road was worse than Sam had described. We had to park a mile out and hike the rest. The forest felt wrong from the start, too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. We found the cabin exactly where it shouldn't have been. Standing. Waiting. Chloe stopped at the edge of the clearing. "I don't like this," she said. Her voice was small. "It feels occupied." "It's empty," Daniel said, already walking toward the porch. "Relax." We went inside. Same cabin. Same cedar smell, same dust, same quilt. But this time there were 4 of us. Surely nothing would try anything with 4 people, right? Strength in numbers. That's what I told myself. We unpacked. We set up the recorder in the corner. We made a fire. We drank beer. By 10 o'clock, we were laughing, telling each other scary stories, pretending we weren't all secretly listening for sounds outside. Marcus kept glancing at the windows, Chloe kept her hand on a salt shaker she'd brought for protection. I rolled my eyes at her. At midnight, we decided to sleep in shifts. Marcus and Chloe would take the first watch, Daniel and I the second. We locked the door. Deadbolt. Chain. Daniel even wedged a chair under the knob. I fell asleep with my head on Daniel's shoulder. What woke me wasn't the cold this time. It was a sound. A soft, rhythmic sound. Footsteps. Outside. Walking around the cabin. I sat up. Daniel was already awake, his hand over my mouth. "Don't move," he whispered. His eyes were wide. Chloe and Marcus were huddled by the fireplace. The fire was still going, thank God. But the footsteps were clear now, slow, deliberate, circling. 1, 2, 3, 4 sides of the cabin. Then they stopped. At the front door. A knock. 3 slow knocks. Polite, patient. We all froze. Chloe started crying silently. Marcus picked up the fire poker. Daniel grabbed the digital recorder and pointed it at the door. Then the voice came. Flat. Hollow. Wrong. "Let me in." I shook my head. No one moved. The doorknob turned. The deadbolt held. But the chain started to rattle. Not like someone was pulling it. Like someone was unthreading it. Link by link. I watched as the chain sagged, then fell to the floor with a soft clink. The door opened. Not all the way, just a crack. And through that crack came a smell. Not rot, not smoke. Something worse. The smell of a basement after a flood. Wet, ancient, patient. And then footsteps. Inside the cabin. But there was no one there. I could hear the floorboards creak in a line from the door to the fireplace. A path of pressure, like an invisible person, was walking toward us. Chloe screamed. Marcus swung the poker through empty air. Daniel yanked me to my feet. We ran for the back door, unlocked it, threw it open, and bolted into the woods. We ran until our lungs burned, until branches cut our faces, until we couldn't run anymore. And when we finally stopped, panting, leaning against trees, we realized we were lost. No trail, no lights, no cabin visible anywhere. But we could still hear it. From the direction we'd come, faint but clear, the sound of the front door closing. A soft click. And then the rocking chair on the porch, creaking, back and forth, back and forth. We didn't sleep that night. We walked until dawn found us, stumbling onto the main road, half frozen and hysterical. We found the SUV. We drove. We never went back. Here's the thing about the 3 of us now. Mark doesn't leave his apartment after dark. Sam has moved 3 times, but says the shape is always in the background of his photos now, closer each time. And me? I still wake up at 3 a.m. I still feel the cold. And I know, with a certainty that sits in my bones like poison, that the cabin wasn't empty when we got there. It was never empty. Something lives in it. Something that knocks. Something that waits. And if you ever find yourself on a dirt road, deep in the woods, and you see a cabin that shouldn't be there, don't go inside. Don't lock the door. Don't fall asleep. Because you might wake up to footsteps, and the thing making them won't be outside anymore. It'll be right behind you, and it'll smile.